All right, good afternoon. This is Rob with Greenshades Software. We are going to be going over a webinar for 2022, the year of the Deskless Worker, and kind of what that means and what that means to employers today, and how you manage HR and payroll for a mobile workforce right now. So Greenshades is kind of not necessarily coined, but we've definitely adopted the term Deskless Worker as we work with a ton of businesses throughout the United States and North America that have to have deal with essentially moving to a remote workforce. And that means a couple of different things, and I'll kind of go over some of that here in the webinar. If anybody has any questions, feel free to post those in the chat or put a them in the question option and go to webinar. We will have the handout as well as a recording available after the webinar, and we'll be doing some follow-up. So feel free, if we don't get to your questions through this, we also have some contact information going out after the webinar where we'll definitely touch on any questions that anybody does have. So thank you for joining and thank you for your time today. I'm going to get rolling here as now we are 1 minute in. All right, so as I said, I'm Rob Bright. I'm the VP of Sales here at Greenshades Software. I've been here about a dozen years this year, and this is Greenshades' 20th year in business. So we are celebrating our anniversary. We have a little over 4,000 total clients. And across the years, I've definitely helped a lot of you as well as your partners and resellers. And we've seen a lot of changes, I would say, since my tenure here and since we've been in business. We started out, if you're not familiar with Greenshades, obviously, helping out around payroll taxes and things of that nature, primarily in the Microsoft Dynamics stack, but we've grown definitely over the years and kind of helped in a lot of different ways related to payroll and HR today. And obviously we have our own payroll module, which I'll talk a little bit about through this webinar, but it's primarily just kind of talking about the remote workforce and what deskless workers mean and what they need and how you can meet some of those business objectives that you might have while also supporting your employees appropriately. So today's agenda, what we're going to be touching on is really just defining the deskless worker. What does that mean? What are you looking for as far as meeting their needs, what resources you might need to have as an employer, and just a general kind of checklist on what are you looking for if you're trying to meet some of those needs and how you solve for some of your business challenges that you might have in moving through kind of the environment that we're in today. Both obviously through COVID, it accelerated a number of different things as far as employees moving remotely, as well as just in general, a lot of our business objectives changing through COVID, right? A lot of people have had to adapt and evolve and take a different direction than they might have prior to the pandemic starting. So we're going to touch on some of that through that checklist. And then in true Greenshades fashion, right, we're going to touch on a lot of compliance aspects related to trying to meet those needs of that deskless worker and what you need to look for in a company and a partner, et cetera, related to those business challenges. So again, if you have any questions, please let us know in the chat, but we're going to ask a couple questions through this webinar as well. First off, we're going to start with our first poll question here. We have Tyler Smythe, who is our marketing manager, in here as well, helping me do this. So he's going to kick off one of the poll questions. You got about 30 seconds or so where you're going to answer that. And we'll share some of the answers through the poll as well. So please answer that and we'll get to it as we move through some of this. Just in general, just know we're really just trying to capture kind of business needs through some of these questions and better understand what your workforce looks like today and what it might look like tomorrow and what your future plans might look like. Are you going to stay remote? Are you continuing with some of the changes that happened through the last 2 years or so? As Greenshades specifically has, we definitely have moved all remote. We do still house an office in Jacksonville, Florida, as well as a couple other places where we allow co-work, but we are a full remote workforce. I myself am based in Jacksonville, Florida, as well as many people at Greenshades is, but we allow employees to essentially work across the United States and are answering for a lot of these challenges that we talk through in this webinar ourselves internally as a business. So about 5 more seconds and we're going to shut down that first poll question and we are going to share the results.
I was one step ahead of you, Rob. I'm sharing them right now.
Okay, perfect. Great. And you can see that, it's kind of a mix. There's a combination across most of these answers, right? We still have some people in the office. You still have some people working remote. And then depending on the need of the business, a lot of those might still need to go into the office. Obviously for like healthcare workers and things of that nature, not a lot of options for a ton of those employees, right? So really just depending on the needs of your business and what you're looking at, that's going to define that answer. But most employers, Greenshades ourselves included, it's a combination. As I said, we allow and we're a full remote workforce, but we still do physical print and mail for things like W-2s, 1099s, 1095Cs, paychecks, pay stubs, et cetera, right? And obviously we need to have a physical facility to do so. We go through multiple security audits and, in actually handling that physical print and mail, we have to have things like printers, right? So we ourselves are a combined workforce, but we allow full remote work, but obviously there's a subset of our employees that have to go in the office, especially for our IT team. I'm sure they wish there was something different, but they have to support all these remote employees now today, right? So and moving forward, the deskless worker, what are the traditional definitions? I mean, when Greenshades talks about it, you might have heard it through other webinars or any of our sales contacts kind of talking about it in a general sense. We talk about it in kind of a vertical specific sense, as far as that might be hospitality, manufacturing, transportation, things of that nature, where there's not a true desk, right? There's a workforce who's going to work and they might be in a facility, but they're not sitting at a desk all day. That's deskless in the traditional sense, right? And historically, it's individuals who aren't tethered to that desk. That's what that matters, right? To do their day-to-day tasks. So we house a lot of those clients, whether it's from staffing all the way down to manufacturing and transportation. And then during the pandemic, a lot of those same employees got the title of essential worker, obviously, because it was still essential that they went into the office or went into work essentially during the pandemic. So they gained that title, but it covers a majority of the actual global workforce if we're actually talking quantity of employees across this workforce, right? Deskless doesn't mean disconnected when we talk about that, though. They might not have a traditional desk, but they still have all the same needs as far as interacting with technology, whether it's updating a CRM, getting access to payroll and HR information, right? There is kind of this idea that a lot of those employees might not have access, or historically legacy side didn't have access necessarily to a computer or something along those lines. Now I believe we all know we all have access to mobile phones, and there's a high expectation for that payroll and HR information to be accessible through mobile phones. And not only that, I mean, Greenshades internally, obviously we care a lot about our customer relationship management system and a lot of our internal tools, whether it's sales side or not, to have mobile access. Because as we think about deskless, we are moving around and living our lives and need to support our client base any given time of the day, right? So we're not the only business like that. A lot of our clients and a lot of our partners work in a similar fashion. So 70% of those actual contacts indicate they want more technology, right? And I think when we think of this term and a lot of this employee base, we think they might interact with technology different. They want more of it. They want more automation. They want more access. They want more transparency to all of that information, right? And hence that last bullet, they indicated they're dissatisfied with how some of that technology is provided to them and how it is managed, either by their employer or the partner they might be utilizing, et cetera. And I think, employee satisfaction, especially right now in the climate that we're in, is a primary business driver for a lot of companies, right? And Greenshades is one of those, definitely. So they rely on that technology just as much as office workers, just as much as people tethered or tied to a desk, regardless of what, we might legacy think of them 10 years ago. We had a very different definition and idea on who needed access to what information. And now I think we've definitely evolved and adapted over time to employees need access to as much of their information as possible. They need to be empowered to change as much of it as possible too. And that then streamlines obviously some of that administrative work that we have, right? So there's new categories of workers that are rapidly emerging. I mean, we've all heard of things like gig work, and we have a ton of remote employees. I think remote used to be seen as a privilege essentially in some of these positions, depending on the type of work and type of company you work with. And now I would say it's almost expected in some industries, in some specific positions, or at least a combination of it is definitely expected, right? By the end of 2020, the end of the first year of the pandemic, right, 71% of employed Americans who could do their job remotely, they were working from home. And obviously we all know that 29, almost that 30%, a lot of those were the essential workers, but a good portion of them, right, were working at home in periodic times as well, right? A massive percentage of those employees state they're more productive when they're working from home. I was talking about mobile capabilities, and a lot of employees, myself included, feel work very efficiently working from home. And that's because we have constant access to data. There's constant access to more information and to make changes and to reach out. And there's also a work-life balance that has to be given some consideration now as we move forward in the future. So a good portion of those remote employees expect to continue to work from home as well. 83%, such a high percentage. I don't think anybody would have guessed back 2 years ago that we would be here today, where that large of that current remote workforce would be pushing to stay home, right? And to at least expect that combination, right? The 3 days a week, I think, is what's noted here. But there's a ton of information you can find online that's pretty variable. We note, obviously, some of these statistics where we're pulling them from, and I think we'll have that as part of this deck. But if you have any specific questions or want access to that information, is noted here. We can also shoot you the content and collateral and information from some of those resource articles that we found, right? 99% of those remote workers would like to keep working in this arrangement, right, for the foreseeable future. That's the majority of people. Obviously, that's pretty much everybody. The 1%, obviously, it can be based on a lot of different things, but rolling into kind of how and why we're talking about this, we're talking about the evolving worker, the evolving workforce. I mentioned gig workers, right? The gig economy, quote unquote. The ranks are rising throughout the country on employees that are leaving their current jobs, and we have gone from previously the Great Recession to now the Great Rehire, and then the Great Resignation are things that we're all hearing right now. And whether that's media information that's just being compounded, et cetera, but these are real numbers. Almost 50 million workers are leaving their jobs. 10 million of those workers classified as self-employed, right? A lot of startups happening right now, a lot of people starting their own businesses, but also just a lot of consultants. A lot of people I've seen and are pushing, now that they're working from, have a better understanding of maybe they can do this for multiple businesses. Maybe it makes sense both for their current employer as well as them to move to things like consultants, right? So as we think about how kind of the economy is moving, it becomes very, very important to how we're supporting those employees and why they're making those decisions and what their primary drivers are, and whether or not that's all financial versus flexibility versus transparency. It's very important to answer that with trying to meet the needs of your own business, right? So when we're talking about the deskless workforce and why they're making these decisions, and we're weaving in payroll and HR information, HR and all of the information and accessibility that it entertains essentially through these employee portals that we've talked about for years, it is that empowerment that a lot of employees are looking for, and a lot of the engagement that you as an employer are looking for, whether that's for things like surveys, just communication in general. A lot of employees aren't communicating directly to us as employers or admins when they might be looking, or when things might be happening on their side, and they might be looking for some of these options or changes. But you can see it based on the content and information that they're looking for, or downloading or accessing based on what you have available to them. And a lot of it can happen based very quickly when they become, they're looking at all the options that they have today, of which I think we all know there's a ton of different jobs open right now. Greenshades is hiring a lot of different positions. A lot of our clients, partners, prospects, et cetera, have a lot of job openings, right? So when we talk about Great Resignation, we just saw 50 million workers, right, on one of those slides. We also know there's a ton of job openings from some of that turnover. We're seeing a lot of applicants, but it's very different, and they have the ability to be a little picky comparatively versus previous years. That's what we all know. And they're asking things like, what do HR portals look like? What kind of access to information do I have? And what tools do you use internally? Where previously, at least in my experience, those weren't first level questions that we were getting in initial interviews like they might be today, right? So bringing all of that together, right? Is this the new face of work? I think at Greenshades, what we're seeing is this is definitely a trend that's not going to go away, right? This is redefining essentially that employment landscape and how we're having to interact both with candidates as well as current employees, right? These employees that don't have a traditional desk, whether that's from remote work or the type of industry that they might work in, it is a post-COVID workplace, right? But it's also something that I think is sticking around due to the options that these employees and us as employers also have, right? And some of those options are moving to modern systems and streamlining a lot of internal back office options to have a better understanding of what kind of workforce we might need. When we talk about workforce reporting and things of that nature, I know us at Greenshades through our payroll module and everything else, we're getting a lot of those reporting requests, and people want to understand labor costs and try to project and forecast appropriately and really understand where the money in their business is going, where their largest investments are on the payroll side of things, right? So these things are not, one note or catering to one side or the other. I think it's leading to greater efficiencies as employers, and employees have, some leg room, I would say right now, to choose the best option for them, and we as employers get to decide how we're handling our own businesses, right? So we need to rely on a diverse group of worker types when we talk about this, whether it's work locations, whether it's remote work. Obviously, I talked about a lot of job openings right now. All of this is to talk about, we're trying to remain competitive. There are a lot of people in a lot of different businesses out there today, and a lot of people starting up their own businesses and starting to do consultant work, right? So it's really, really important we have a good understanding of that, and not have kind of this legacy privileged mindset of understanding that you might have a great place to work and you might offer a great benefits package at times, right? But really understanding that tool set, the empowerment, the work-life balance that comes with all of those things is very important nowadays, and really driving towards that employee satisfaction is top of mind both to employers as well as employees now, right? They're really trying to take stock into why they're doing what they're doing, what the outcomes for the business as well as themselves is today, where before the thought process, I would say, of quote unquote punching a clock or having a 9 to 5 is a little bit different. I think we're all very invested in the work that we're doing every day and want to understand what outcomes we are working towards. Obviously, personally myself, I'm 12 years in at Greenshades. I really care about the health of this company and what kind of business decisions we're making and what tools I myself as a manager give employees, but us as a business, whether it's on different sides of the business, different departments, give access and empower those different departments and employees to succeed at their jobs. So it's twofold. We can work efficiently as a business, and those employees can work as efficiently as possible. When we think about large employee counts and some of these deskless workers, that's where that mindset kind of comes from, is there's a legacy process and a legacy way of, well, we've always done this and we've always been successful. And then I think, moving through the last 2 years, we've all had to change and adapt, and there's still some pain that we're having to move through in doing so. And I think, we're seeing a lot of that through the hiring and resignations that's happening, through a lot of the workforce today, right? So in moving through this, I'm going to ask the second poll question now. So Tyler's going to kick off the second question for us, right? And that question is, how are employees accessing, this payroll and HR information for your companies today, right? Is it, whether it's online, whether it's a mix, their own devices, company devices only, company provided devices, still doing some stuff on paper, you don't know because it's not your job, right? There are a couple different options here. I would say the majority of business I talk to, at least some of their processes are available, through things like portals, et cetera. But it's, how are you allowing them access to that? Is it only through a company device? If so, if you have a remote workforce, like many of you reference, or you have a combined workforce and it's only through a company device, right? Company provided devices, is that as flexible and as transparent as it could be? With places like Greenshades and many other providers out there, whether it's payroll, HR, or some other ancillary add-on tool related to it, they have to be secure because we're touching personally identifiable information regardless, right? PII is across the industry, highly audited. Greenshades goes through a SOC type 2 audit. We also go through a ton of internal audits to make sure this information is secure and tightly behind closed doors. And I think us as businesses constantly think, back to when you had to access a specific server, you had specific administrators that had access to this information. People had to come into the office to run payroll and things of that nature. When we think of employees, we might think of just our primary employee base, and sometimes not those internal admins or some of the internal company employees that we might have. And if you're requiring them to access through only company devices and not utilize the security that's available through some of the partners like Greenshades, right? Are you allowing it to be as flexible as it could be, right? And the answer might be yes. The answer might be that these devices are company provided either way, and it's the right thing to do. You decide the needs of your business, but I'm asking the questions that are asked every day by the payroll admins that we're talking to or we're selling to or are vetting our system for possibly moving to it, or even we're saying might not be a good fit based on what their actual internal needs are, right? So just continually, some of these questions and some of the stuff that we're moving through in this webinar is really just to ensure that we're asking ourselves these questions. We're doing an internal audit to ensure and understand, is this the right fit? Are we evolving with the market right now? Are we handling this in the best way that we could, right? And as you can see from some of these answers, a couple people still on paper, a couple people not sure. Primarily, most of the people that answered anyways were online using company provided devices, right? So I was asking a lot of the questions that I would expect us as, whether you're a business owner, administrator, et cetera, that you would need to be asking to ensure, are you being as flexible as possible? Is this as tightly secure as you would like it? Are you relying on your own internal security or some of these providers that you're working with? And I think historically, we might think our own internal security is the most secure, but I can tell you we handle payroll information for thousands of companies and millions of employees log into our systems. The audits that we go through are typically going to be a little bit more stringent than audits that might happen at a insert any industry, just because that's what we're handling outside of something like a hospital where obviously there's HIPAA and all kinds of other rules and there's a ton of different audits. Really internal payroll information might be a little bit lower on your list than it is for a company like Greenshades or any other provider out there who's handling this information day in and day out, right? So as we think about the deskless worker, right, we definitely want to kind of better understand, what are the wants, needs, resources they might need. And I've, inserted in a couple of different ways, obviously, the connection that they might need to payroll and HR information. And that's relevant to Greenshades, but it's relevant to every business because every business has to cut checks in America and they have to pay their employees, right? They need access to this information, some of the updates as employees are moving, working remote, maybe even moving out of state, right? You're going in a new state, you have to collect tax information, et cetera. But are you staying connected with them? Are you allowing them the empowerment to update some of that information? And it's not only siloed to payroll and HR information. Obviously, HR information is a pretty broad term as it's, encompasses all the employee level data you could think of. But anything that's relevant to your business needs, changes, and information that those employees, how they get paid, how they update their own personal information, or even all the way down to things like schedules and what resources they have, what their health benefits look like, what are included in those benefits, are all very, very important in relation to their access to information. So as we think about this, is it in a centralized location? How much time would they have to, spend to go across however many tools you might have? How many different portals are they logging in? If you have a time entry portal, you have an HR portal, they're logging in somewhere else to get their pay stub, you have a different place for your benefits. Obviously, that can be a little bit cumbersome. And you as an employer, right, want to care about how your spending employee time essentially, but also your employees care a lot about how they're spending their own personal time, whether they're going out and getting a loan and need to access that information immediately, or they're at the doctor's office and they forgot their insurance card and they have to log into the benefits portal and then the provider portal to get that information. It becomes cumbersome. And I think us as employees ourselves at times, if you're not an owner specifically, but even if you are, you have to care about your own pay information. But we can understand, right, where it's cumbersome. And just because we know all the context on why it's cumbersome, I think it drives us to sometimes not make changes and not update, some of these antiquated practices that we've built out over a long time because we understand some of the complicated and cumbersome changes we'd have to make internally to meet some of those employee level needs. And I think a lot of what I've already talked about, in this webinar and in this deck goes to show those might be worthwhile changes in today's current environment, in tomorrow's current environment. Like I said, from all of the surveys and employee information and employee surveys that we've done and seen, and a lot of the research that we've done in relation to this webinar goes to show the climate isn't going to change, right? It's only going to continue to move in this direction. The gig economy and things of that nature were talked about well before the pandemic and well before COVID. We were seeing things like Uber and obviously Lyft and a lot of those kind of, quote unquote gig jobs where it's in between a contractor and employee almost, have been happening, since and evolving really since 2010, 2015, in between that window. And the pandemic then accelerated so much of this. So access to information, access to those resources, access to the internal business applications are all very, very relevant things to have to care about, and how much time you're spending, and your employees are spending putting in that information, how much time you're spending collecting that information, and I think we all, especially in the Microsoft space or even a lot of these other ERPs, kind of rely or see integrations as a possible answer and look for things like automation. But the answer is, if it's between so many different systems, that's not, assisting or cutting down on that employee time investment. That might need to be a little bit larger of a priority as we move forward. And when we think of things like, possibly embedded systems and embedded answers, the answer might not be there as well, right? Like you have to think of, what options do I need? Do these other legacy systems that are embedded or have possibly a portal, but it's missing so much of these other things that employees do need and I need, related to workforce management and labor cost management that I talked about earlier, right? There's no single source answer that's going to wave a magic wand and answer the need for everybody, but it's prioritizing these things within your business and then making the best decision that you can, obviously, but ensuring that you're continually evaluating that decision and evolving with the market that matters so much, right? You need to better connect with the business as an employee. I have to care so much about Greenshades and what the next step is for us as a company. And I think all of us across, the business, but especially, in professional services or software or anything in relation to that, but even outside of those industries, you have to really understand the market that you're in and what the next step is for that business. And a lot of people are making personal decisions related to those business objectives that they might not have been making, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, that now they are. Now they want to be connected to that business, connected to the business model, and make sure that they're making good decisions for themselves, right? Workers want to feel supported, right? Everything that I talked about in prioritizing these business needs and prioritizing a lot of these options and decisions are primarily so you do support your workers. When I talk about things like empowerment and engagement, they sound like nice marketing terms, but in reality, they mean something to employees and they mean something to employers. The more engagement you have from your employees, the better feedback you're getting, and the easier it is to prioritize some of those changes you might need to be making, right? Across the board, regardless of whether they're in a quote unquote deskless worker, where we're talking about industry specific deskless workers, or it's a remote workforce, right? Where they're deskless, but they're at home, possibly behind a desk, right? Everybody's seeing increased workloads. And I think related to resignations and churn and the quantity of employees that I just referenced earlier, almost 50 million that have changed jobs or left the workforce in the last 2 years. I think obviously workloads have increased because bottom lines are still bottom lines, right? We also have to have profitable businesses. And I don't know about everybody on this call, but as of 2022, our goals are continuing to increase. Everybody still is pushing to go up and to the right. And with that, you're going to see a higher workload, right? And especially when hiring is difficult and there's a large job pool, but also it's very competitive hiring employees, right? So what do you do when your employees feel like they are over, their workloads are increasing? You ensure that they're supported, they have the resources that they need, they're connected to the business. All the things I talked about in these previous slides is driving to not have your employees part of that 50 million that did resign. And I think, most businesses in America, ours included, definitely had employees, switch positions and change jobs and go elsewhere, right? And that's why this is such a relevant and prevalent topic still today, is because it's not going anywhere. It hasn't slowed down, right? It wasn't just a blip in time and just a reaction to the market or anything along those lines. These are real challenges in the current environment. And I think as there's more, stress and frustration in individuals' roles, right, it's going to contribute to that turnover, to that churn, right? And the unwanted attrition, which, regular business attrition is, and employee attrition is expected. And we can all, work to regulate it as much as possible and forecast as much as possible. It's really that unwanted attrition, whether it's a legacy employee or new employees you brought on, and, you thought a higher compensation, et cetera, was going to be a primary driver to keep some of those employees around. I think we've all found that that isn't always the primary driver for a lot of individuals. That definitely plays a part into how they're making these decisions, but all the tools, the support, the access to information, the flexibility with the current workforce is really what's driving, you know, those employees to kind of stick around and not look elsewhere. So we're working to, improve the overall employee experience. And I think as employees are surveyed, I think a lot of software companies, specifically, Greenshades has a lot of experience in this, but we, do things like employee NPS. We're sending out a lot of surveys, we're trying to capture a lot of feedback, and there's still a portion of employees that aren't answering that information. So when I talk about engagement and empowerment and having things like, HR portals where you can have that immediate feedback and you can see, what information they need access to and how often they need access to it, it works a little bit different because you might not be getting that vocal feedback, but you're seeing that they're accessing their information. They're engaged with the information that you're putting out there. They're utilizing the tools that they're enrolling in a lot of the benefits that you're putting out there. It shows you that your employees are not expecting to quickly, continue to look for a different job or continue to move to a different position. They are, actively engaged in the things that you are offering, right? So if you're not in a modern system and you're not, focused on this as, a relevant business topic as an employer, I think it can definitely, cause some pain down the line that's not going to go away again. There's, a ton of webinars, Greenshades puts on some about moving to the cloud and things of that nature. All of that is a part of the same strategy, right? Staying relevant, staying evolving and adapting to the current times, but also thinking ahead. What's it going to look like next year? How do you stay competitive? What are your competition? What's your competition doing? But also, what are your employees leaving for? If it's not compensation, right now, there's a number of different options where previously, at times, I think we all could focus on primarily compensation and benefits, which are still, I would say, the top two, employee questions. But now it's driving down into all those other questions that I've referenced earlier, as far as what does your tool stack look like? How am I accessing this information every day? What does a day in the life look like for this position? That you're just driving a bit deeper. You're getting interviewed almost by employees as you're trying to recruit them, but even current employees are more vocal at times, which is positive as long as it's current feedback and not through an exit interview. I think we can all take that as a learning, right? And work towards some of these objectives that I'm talking about, right? And across a lot of this employee experience, I think what we see as the highest investment and why Greenshades is, continuing to produce not only a lot of content, but new features, new information, and new processes in our current product stack and moving to our payroll and HCM module is really because we see a lot of companies investing in these pieces, and all the way to our marketplace where we have partners in things like applicant tracking and learning management systems and daily wage pay and things like pay cards that are highly requested because they're answering for the needs of their employees, not just the needs of the business anymore. It's the needs of the employees are the needs of the business, right? They work hand in hand, where historically we're all working to go up and to the right, but now in order to do so, we are engaging with this employee base, right? Cool. So in general, right, we've touched on all of these topics, or at least I've utilized a number of these terms before I got to the slide, but they want technology on their terms. What does that mean? They want it easy to use. They want it friendly to use. And I think we have such a diverse employee base now. I mean, people utilize generational terms like millennial and zennials and, the Generation X, et cetera, that continue to, have different needs themselves. And we don't have just one note that we can cater to and focus on. I mean, obviously we want to evolve into the future, but we also have to understand what our current employee base needs and utilizes. And it's not just based off of, how tenured individuals might be or what they're used to and what we've always done because it quote unquote works. It is really, are we attracting new employees with this information as well? Are these processes helping us retain employees? Which I think we can all say there's room for improvement essentially across the board, right? We want to be empowering and transparent with all this information. They want to see their pay, benefits, hours, and report and build out reports for themselves personally more than they ever have, right? So always having this information available and accessible, whether it's through mobile apps, mobile optimized browsers, or just generally on the web to them, that where they can access it any time, and it's not through just that work connection, is very important. And whether it's on, through a work device and it's a company paid for cell phone versus like they have to be on a kiosk or at a desktop at a work location, these are very different answers, right? And I think if we had asked some of the poll questions in that manner, maybe we would have gotten different answers. And I think in general, that's the way we have to better understand this information and better understand some of the feedback that we're getting from this employee base is, am I providing, what they're asking for? And if not, right, am I going to continue to see this unwanted attrition that I talked about earlier, right? Payroll and HR solutions that deliver these terms, right, to any worker, any category, any industry. I mean, there are vertical specific answers out there, right? We all know that. There's point of sale systems. There's all kinds of things that can be specific to any industry, a specific industry that is. But having a horizontal option, especially if you're in a business line that has, a large internal workforce plus multiple different types of franchises, perhaps things of that nature, it's hard to utilize the same systems across those things and have the same offering of employee-based information to those different quote unquote industries that you might be servicing from your business. But companies like Greenshades, there's a couple other companies out there that do have these kind of horizontal offerings, but then also give you the industry specific flexibility that you might need to answer the needs of your actual business model, right? So we're going to kind of start to wrap towards the end here, right? There's generally a checklist that we like to think about, and a lot of this is going to be catered towards kind of what we offer, but in general, it's also answering for the majority of what we're seeing in churn, attrition through the research that we're doing, right? So when you're looking for technology services and support, you want to ensure that it's addressed to all workers, not just your internal staff, not just the staff that does your professional services or just the people doing XYZ, your transportation drivers perhaps getting access to, one level of service, and then the people in the warehouse getting a different level. I mean, these employees are talking, across your company right now, and they're sharing more information than they ever have. And I think all of the things I've talked about through this webinar kind of show that not only are there primary drivers from the employee level for these deskless workers, but they're also sharing the information that they have access to and either recruiting people on one side or the other, right? Whether that's in a negative fashion or a positive, your employees are an extension of that recruiting effort, especially nowadays, especially as there is this large resignation factor. So we focus essentially on 4 key areas, and we say 14 must-haves in here. But in general, I think this is going to be flexible and customized based on what you're looking for. The idea is to say and take a good internal audit and take a look at what information do my employees need access to, what do they have access to, what can we do better, and then build out your list from there. This is focused on payroll, HR, benefits, taxes, usability, because so much of this can take so much time for your internal employees, and it drives that employee engagement. It drives that employee empowerment. When I say things like empowerment, they need the ability to make changes, to tell you when they're looking at moving, to tell you when they are want to enroll in a new benefit, and do it in an automated way, and do it at 2 o'clock in the morning on their phone ideally, and not have to wait and create a task item for themselves where they're only doing it during business hours, right? So we're focused on some of these pieces. Obviously, I think you should cater this to your own business needs, but in general, this is going to cover a majority of what we think is eating a lot of internal business times, especially as we look at some of these legacy processes in legacy systems that we still see employers on, right? So in payroll, we're talking about address, wages, and fair labor. You have to address, minimum wage, overtime rules, things of that nature, FSLA compliance. But for things like California, where there is a ton of OT rules right now, and depending on the industry that you're in, they can be more stringent than not. And what information is accessible on the pay stub, and we are all looking at the news and following regulations. If there's things like compensation that has to be shared across your employee base, if there's information like I referenced, OT has to be on in specific documents in a specific way, Greenshades specifically, but whatever company you work with, is not only addressing the employee need of what they need access to, the employer need of what you have to get done, but also the compliance need on your part to make sure you're checking that box. And if you do get audited or as you submit your tax filings, liability payments, et cetera, that you are as compliant as possible through these processes that are evolving and are updating on a daily basis, right? You want to accelerate that validation, meaning as employees are actually changing their work locations and there's tax updates needed or there's validation needed in any given category, whether it's on some of the subjects that I just talked about or all the way down to like HR validation. You need a HR lawyer contact for some questions that you might have. Greenshades has those service levels in our product where we can give you direct access to some of those things that you might be needing, whether that's tax and compliance assistance or HR contacts across the industry or specifically for liability and laws, right? Support intelligence schedules. So I referenced, they need access to their information at any given time. That means same thing on the admin side. If you have a specific administrator that runs payroll and they need to run payroll at 2 a.m., you want to make sure you're giving them the ability to do that. And if you have, specific pay schedules that you need to make sure that they are running in an efficient fashion and you need to run a one-off cycle check, a one-off bonus, you have access to do so. And that's twofold, both on the administrator side and for the employee, right? Our employees have needs and demands, and there are mistakes that happen in the business. How quickly you address those drives into all these other factors I talked about. If you missed a check run, missed a bonus run, and I say this, missed a check run, that's not an easy thing to do, obviously, but especially when you have a small schedule with 1, 2, 3 employees, something along those lines, it can happen, right? We've seen it happen. And ensuring you have the software support and scalability to answer that quickly and get something done quickly, it matters a lot, right? Rather than having to get on to your work location, connect to a server, and then run payroll and pull up something that may or may not be remote or in the cloud, et cetera. It matters a lot. And then that's driving your employee satisfaction is how quickly you're answering for some of those things, right? So whether that's, the accuracy on things like garnishments, overtime, right? Minimum wage, like we just referenced a couple different times. There's a lot of these different things that might seem like payroll, compliance related, et cetera, but all drive employee satisfaction on how you're handling them, right? All the way through, how you handle benefits, empowering your employees to pick those tools, have self-service tools available, allow them to run numbers and essentially calculations on how it's going to affect their check, how much you're paying, how much they're paying. We are getting more questions as employers and as administrators than we probably ever have related to benefits. I referenced some of these other things that might be driving employee satisfaction and what people are looking for access to, but the requirement or need for benefits information hasn't gone anywhere. It's only gone up, is what I would say. And whether it's through our current integration or our payroll module, we're seeing more focus on benefits offerings and enrollments and automating things like the files to providers than we ever have. And that's not shocking to us as a business, and I would hope it's not shocking to any employer that we work with. But are you answering those things? What benefit types do you support? How quickly does that information go into payroll? What do your processes look like for onboarding employees? Are they efficient, or are you having a multi-approval process, a multi-step process, doing some things on paper, some things are duplicate entry? And I'm talking about employees, but the health and happiness, et cetera, of our administrators in payroll, some of which might be on this call, but payroll and HR is very important to us as a business, and all these tools drive their satisfaction as well, right? So whether we're talking about the benefit side or taxes when employees are changing work locations or changing the state they might live in and filling out a new state W-4 or something along those lines, and then how that information is updated in payroll. Is it accurate? Is it automated? Is it quickly? That matters a lot, and especially for things like 401k updates, W-4 updates, things that affect the outcomes for those employees, whether or not they're on the next check run, again, affect how satisfied they are with some of those pieces that we've been talking about through this webinar, right? usability, I think we all can understand and we all care a lot, but what the employee experience is through any of these tools, whether they're business tools related to payroll, tax, and HR, or whether they're your internal business tools, we all care about the employee experience. But again, we all have the context as to why and how some of these things might work or how they work and whether they should be quick or not. And I think in general, if we're continually to think with inside that context, our context as administrators, implementers, IT people, it definitely is going to not be a positive outcome always if we're not thinking through it through the eyes of our employees and how they're accessing that information and what they need and how it updates things, right? Great, so that's the general checklist kind of moving through this, right? Again, we need to support all the workers in our business in the same similar fashion, not different side of the house, get different access to information or different options, right? Regardless of, how that might have happened legacy side, we're seeing kind of an equalization across some of these businesses where they need onboarding, training, professional development. We need to track applicants as well as what that remote interview experience might look like. Flying people in continually might not be as easy as it used to, especially we saw 2,000 flights canceled, I think, the other day. And it definitely becomes a more challenging experience based on how you're handling some of these processes internally. And then that drives down obviously to the actual true employee experience post hire, where how they're accessing their time information, how they're accessing their pay information, and all of that HR piece that we've been talking about, right? So keeping pace with compliance, right? We're talking about a mobile, remote world, right? I talked a little bit about some of those tax updates, and some of that is related to how Greenshades works, but knowing what partner you partner with in compliance or tax or payroll or HR and what their service level is and support level is very important. And do you have the internal knowledge and expertise to continually keep up with this information? Even the best certified payroll professionals and CPAs, et cetera, are going to have a hard time managing this on a large scale, whether a large scale to you is 300 employees across 5 states, which sounds pretty large to me, or 3,000 employees across 50 states, or up and above that. It can become obviously very complex, and especially with the needs of the business changing and the needs of our employee base changing, that only drives additional levels of complexity, right? So when you're thinking about whether they're across multiple state lines, whether they're working and living in different states, whether they, are in places like Pennsylvania and Ohio that have had the, most difficult, I would say, locality tax options that we've seen throughout America, right? Like answering those pieces continually matter as you're trying to answer a lot of these needs, right? So compliance every step of the way, whether that's through Greenshades or internally, we're happy to help. I talked about the HR service add-on for things like the HR law assistance or HR document pieces. That's not just through Greenshades. We're partnering with a lot of other organizations. We're still all internally developed, all internally supported. However, we are branching out a full marketplace with things like HR law advice and applicant tracking systems like I've referenced in here, and learning management systems, and ensuring we are helping you answer for the breadth of the employee experience. We're not pushing or forcing anybody to utilize those systems, to utilize ours. It's just we know people are looking for some of these options as we're getting the questions internally every day ourselves, right? So today we're helping out 35,000 plus entities across America, millions of employees logging into our systems every day, millions of tax forms sent, right? We have a high net promoter score of 55, the average in the industry. Ranges across the board, but is typically negative for large payroll companies. So we're here to help you. We're here to, again, whether that's through our actual payroll module or just compliance or just answering questions, right? We've been in the space a long time. We have the expertise. It's our 20th anniversary, and we just want to see our clients, prospects, partners succeed, right? So last poll question, and then we're going to wrap up. I think we've got about 10 minutes or so left in the webinar. So if you have any questions or there is anything I didn't touch on, please ask them now. We'll try to get to them in this webinar, and if we don't, we'll follow up directly. All right, and this poll question is really just relevant to like when's the next time you're shopping a payroll and HR system? And obviously Greenshades has a payroll HCM module out on the market today with a couple different service levels, a high tax option as well as HR option. We're seeing a ton of our clients moving to this system. And that might be related to a ERP in the cloud change. That might be just to separate their finance and accounting package from payroll so they can focus on payroll and HR. That might be to get things like new tools and pieces from Greenshades if they're a longstanding client. We're also picking up a lot of clients that are moving to new systems, whether that's NetSuite, Intact, or Dynamics Business Central, or Finance, right? D365 on both sides. We're seeing a lot of different movement in the space to those cloud-based accounting and finance packages. And obviously, decoupling or moving, to a standalone payroll package like Greenshades offers might seem, like a pretty large change, but in reality, what it lets you do is really focus on that finance and accounting piece and pulling out payroll and HR and trying to address a lot of the needs of your business that we just went almost an hour talking about, right? Being able to get all of these features, functionalities, and this employee engagement through the same provider that is handling your accounting and finance, and through the same software that is handling your accounting finance, is a very tall order nowadays. I mean, we were only seeing HR requests and payroll requests and the needs for both sides of the data, whether it's on the employee or employer side, but access to changes and automated processes, we're only going to see that grow. It is a massive back office process that I think previously was just seen as, quote unquote, cutting checks, right? And net to check is just a piece of payroll nowadays. We all know that in relation to things like PTO accrual and garnishments, et cetera. So as you think about Greenshades, you might know us as a tax company. We're a payroll company nowadays, right? And we have thousands of clients that we're working with to try to help them out with those payroll needs. So we're going to wrap up the poll here and then share some of those answers just to show you, how peers in the space might be looking at this. We see a lot of people look at different options in payroll and HR across the board. And I think, yeah, here we go. Across the board, every couple of years, I think is always the generalized answer. But in reality, are you shopping for things like an applicant tracking system, a learning management system, an onboarding system? Are you trying to answer for pain around taxes or employee pay stubs or time entry or benefits enrollment? There's so many different things I could list off. In reality, so many different of those pain points then drive large payroll and HR changes, right? And typically, when we see someone answering for one of those options and then taking into stock how their current payroll and HR process is handled, it will then drive larger change, whether that's today or within the next 12 months. If you have a pain point around any of those processes, you're generally going to be shopping these options within that same year. And you might not feel as if you're shopping for a specific, quote unquote, payroll and HCM system, but if you're answering for those pain points, you're probably going to end up, again, taking an internal audit related to your payroll and HR processes and then seeing how you can answer them in a better fashion, right? If you have any questions about Greenshades or how we can help, obviously, please reach out. I'll have a contact information slide here at the end of this. But my name is Robert Bright, rbright@greenshades.com. Feel free to reach out to me directly, drop questions in the chat if you have them. But we're going to wrap up here on the Deskless Worker webinar. I think what we went over primarily is obviously how the Deskless Worker has really changed, how it's expanded dramatically in the last 2 years. And really what we see in the market and what so many others see, we have a full reference in relation to this deck and the research that went into it, just to show that it's not us making, making a decision and saying this isn't going anywhere just based on what we're seeing in our client base, which is, again, 4,000 plus clients, 35,000 plus entities across America. It's in large media companies that they're posting this information, all the way from Forbes to other industry-specific news articles that we're finding this year. It's current information that we're pulling. We're not, pulling information from the last 6, 12, 18 months where, we could have been mid-pandemic in 2020. Is the content and surveying that we're seeing now relevant to the rest of the market? What we're seeing is not only is it relevant, people are sometimes seeing it escalate much further than we're even seeing it right now. So I think that shows it's not just a trend, it's not just a blip on the radar. This is really where the ship is steering for most employers across America, right? So the traditional office workers and independent contractors, right, is driving that expansion, right? The wants and needs of all these employees and what they are looking for in these new positions, it's driving a lot of this, right? So if you need a robust mobile online offering related to payroll, HR, tax, compliance, right? Greenshades is here to help. There's other providers out there on the market as well. We've been around for 20 years though, helping out those thousands of companies and millions of employees. So if we can help you in your business today, if you have any of these pain points that I referenced, please reach out. We're happy to help you. Whether you're a partner, a client, a prospect, or you just know somebody who might have some of these problems, please let us know. So thank you everybody for your time today. We definitely appreciate it. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, again, we're going to stick around, I think, for about 1 or 2 more minutes after I close this down, just to make sure we catch all those questions. But feel free to reach out directly to this number that I'm putting up on the screen, or sales@greenshades.com, or me personally, rbright@greenshades.com. We'll also be at the American Payroll Association in May and the Society for Human Resource Management shows in June. So if you're going to any of those national shows for APA or SHRM Research, we'll be there as well. Feel free to come see us. Thank you for joining today, and we'll see you soon.